Happy Frazetta Friday, Frazetta fans. I'm Sara, and this is Frazetta Fridays with Frazetta Girls. I recently read that Tom Cruise is planning to star alongside Scarlett Johansson in a remake of Clint Eastwood's 1977 film, The Gauntlet. And that got me thinking a bit about the time Mr. Eastwood commissioned my grandpa to do a painting for him. During his career, my grandfather, Frank Frazetta, was a prolific comic artist, a newspaper cartoonist, a magazine illustrator, and a popular paperback cover artist. But beginning in 1965, his most lucrative jobs were painting movie posters, and he got his start purely by accident. In 1964, Mad Magazine was one of the most popular magazines in the country with a circulation of nearly 1.5 million. Frazetta's friend, Nick Meglin, was a Mad editor and well aware of Frazetta's sense of humor, hired him to paint a caricature of Beatles drummer Ringo Starr for a parody of the Breck shampoo ads. Make Beautiful Hair Black was featured as the back cover of the October 1964 issue. Although he appreciated the check, Frazetta forgot about it almost before the paint was dry. It was a joke, not something he was likely to repeat, and not really a big deal. But someone at the advertising agency for United Artists definitely thought it was a big deal and believed this Frazetta guy would be the perfect choice to paint the poster for a new screwball comedy starring Peter Sellers and Peter O'Toole, What's New, Pussycat? During the 1960s, the median family income in the United States was around $6,500. At the time, Frazetta was making anywhere from $250 to $400 for his magazine and paperback covers, and he quickly discovered advertising paid a lot better. Depending on my grandparents' memories and moods of the day, they were asked, he earned between $4,000 and $5,000 to create the A and B posters for What's New, Pussycat, which is the equivalent of nearly $50,000 in today's dollars. My grandpa described the first check as an entire year's salary for one job. Mostly working in watercolor and gouache and using cast photos provided by the agency as reference, Frazetta went on to produce art for After the Fox, The Secret of My Success, Hotel Paradiso, The Night They Raided Minsky's, and The Busybody, among others. Studios normally offered more than one poster to theaters, either featuring art or photographs, to help appeal to different audiences. As with What's New, Pussycat, sometimes Frazetta's poster jobs required he do more than one painting. The art would be reconfigured by the designer to use in various sizes and formats, both in the United States and overseas. Many times paintings were also used for licensed products like soundtrack albums or paperback novelizations, but he wasn't paid anything extra when that occurred. On a few occasions, his art wasn't used, but he was paid the same amount regardless. The studio became the owner of the copyrights, and they almost always kept the original painting. Though he was thrilled with the money, Frazetta was never particularly happy about doing these movie posters. As the saying goes, the client is always right, and he grumbled about having to submit multiple roughs, the extensive art directions, and the inevitable changes that were all part of working in the world of advertising. From the beginning, he was pigeonholed as a humor artist and was forced to follow the comedy template that Jack Davis had inadvertently created in 1963 with his poster for It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which featured a crowd chasing after the film's star. Frazetta got bored by the repetition and was frustrated that he wasn't being offered the types of blockbuster action-adventure jobs that were going to Frank McCarthy, Howard Turpning, Bob Peake, and Robert McGinnis. In 1969, while drawing the rough for Paint Your Wagon poster featuring a cast of thousands chasing around Lee Marvin's feet, he threw down his pencil and he quit. Ron Lesser and Peter Max ultimately were hired to replace him, and surprisingly, their posters didn't follow the Davis template at all. Frazetta often said that Paint Your Wagon was his last movie work, but his memory was playing him false, as it often did when it came to dates and details of his career. He actually created the posters for Mrs. Polifax and the African Elephant documentary, which wasn't used, in 1961, Luana in 1973, and of course others some years later. But his primary focus in the 1970s was painting paperback covers, and Frazetta was by that point at the peak of his commercial art career. The first book collecting his work, The Fantastic Art of Frank Frazetta, was published by the Peacock Press in 1975 and was enormously popular. It had gone through multiple printings to keep up with demand, and a second book published in 1977 was selling almost as fast. The mainstream press had shone a spotlight on him with features in American Artist, Newsweek, and Esquire, and my grandmother's poster business was booming. Things were going well. Their bank account was bulging, and Frazetta wasn't interested in doing a lot of extra work, much less taking on the rigors and frustrations of painting movie posters. Until Clint Eastwood called. By 1977, thanks to Sergio Leone, Man with No Name Westerns, the Dirty Harry series, High Plains Drifter, and many other films, Clint Eastwood was one of the world's most popular actors and biggest box office attractions. The Gauntlet was originally supposed to star Marlon Brando and Barbra Streisand. When Brando dropped out, Steve McQueen was hired as the male lead, but disagreements between he and Streisand quickly led to both leaving the production. Warner Brothers brought Eastwood in as both star and director of the film, and he hired his companion, Sandra Locke, who had first worked with him in The Outlaw Josie Wales, to co-star. Eastwood had read the Esquire article about Frazetta, and he decided to contact him about painting the movie poster for his new movie. Over the years, my grandpa told two slightly different versions of the story. The first was that my grandmother was the one who answered the phone and hung up because she didn't believe the caller was Clint Eastwood, which is the way my mom remembers it. And the second was that one of the kids picked up the phone and hung up at my grandpa's direction because he didn't believe it. Regardless of who answered and hung up, Clint did call back, spoke to my grandpa, who was a big Eastwood fan, and then he paid them a visit at their home in East Stroudsburg. After discussing the movie and looking through some set photos, Frazetta agreed to take the job and began showing him his paintings. There was one in particular that caught Clint's attention. "I want it to look like that," Frazetta remembered Eastwood telling him. The painting was Dark Kingdom, the cover for the paperback edition of Dark Crusade by Carl Edward Wagner. Frazetta said, "How can I have Clint standing in front of a bus looking like a barbarian? I don't know how I'm gonna do it, but I'll try." Shortly after he left, Frazetta set up a camera timer and shot some photos of himself in some non-traditional poses that he thought might work and began drawing some rough works for approval. Frazetta said, "My rough works were a radical change for a Clint Eastwood look. He looked supple, cat-like, and very dynamic in them. For laughs, I threw in one more sketch that typified Clint Eastwood standing tall. I told Ellie, I'm sure he's not going to pick this one, and she said, he probably will now. And I said, no, the others are too good. He can't possibly select this one." Guess which one he chose? He couldn't believe it. The cliche Clint Eastwood look. Frazetta told similar versions of the story with slight embellishments and variations over the years, but in looking at the roughs, it seems that his memory wasn't entirely accurate. In what I've been able to find, there are two roughs reflecting his preferred cat-like direction, along with photos of himself working out the pose, and two different ones of Clint standing tall that are similar to the finished painting. Both appear to be more than just a last-minute joke. Despite any disappointment about the rough that was chosen, he did the painting and Clint and Sandra Locke returned to pick it up. I'm not sure what his deadline was. After 47 years, many details to the story are unknown or have been forgotten, but there was enough time for Russ Cochran, who was acting as a sales rep for Frazetta, to travel from southeastern Missouri to Pennsylvania to take photos of the transaction. Frazetta remembered, "I made Sandra Locke look real beautiful. With her standing right there, Clint said, 'Frank, she's not that pretty. Look at her. She looks like a bird.' And she laughed and playfully whacked Clint." My mother was a teenager at the time and recalls that Clint Eastwood was very friendly and he got along easily with Frazetta. She had both Clint and Sandra sign her guest book while they were there. At some point, my grandparents told people he was paid $20,000 to do the one painting, 4 or 5 times higher his standard rate for a movie poster, and on top of that, they negotiated the sale of the original to Eastwood for $5,000. But is it true? It's hard to say. At the time, Cochran had been selling paintings for my grandparents, and prices ranged between $2,500 and $3,500. So the $5,000 my grandmother asked wasn't out of line and sounds about right. But $20,000 in 1977 is equal to over $97,000 today, which would have been a crazy amount for a studio to pay for any movie poster, much less one for a film that had a total budget of $5.5 million, including advertising. Eastwood and his production company, Malpaso, were renowned for delivering films on time and on budget. So paying Frazetta far above the standard rate for a poster would seem uncharacteristic, especially when the check was coming from Warner Brothers accountants. Plus, he only had painted one poster. Other illustrators and designers produced additional posters for the Gauntlet, and they had to be paid too. And to be perfectly honest, my grandparents were prone to exaggeration when telling their stories, particularly when it came to money. And they would sometimes mention totally fictitious figures they'd supposedly made for jobs or art sales to either impress listeners or to see if potential customers fainted. That said, although I'm highly suspicious of the $20,000 figure, I'm also reasonably confident that Frazetta did get some sort of pay increase to paint the Gauntlet poster. Exactly how much of an increase? I don't think anyone will ever know for sure. Regardless, Sandra and Clint drove away with the finished painting in the back of his new Porsche, and that concluded their relationship. Other actors and directors would visit or contact my grandparents over the years. Sylvester Stallone unsuccessfully tried to hire my grandpa to paint the poster for Paradise Alley. Francis Ford Coppola wanted him to travel to the Philippines to be some sort of visual consultant on Apocalypse Now, which he turned down. And he declined offers from Dino De Laurentiis and George Lucas to create posters for King Kong and Star Wars, respectively. He did take the commission from John and Bo Derek to paint the letterhead from their production company, and later created a poster for their movie, Ghost Can't Do It, which wasn't used, but for the most part, Frazetta turned down many more jobs than he'd actually take. People often make assumptions or get romantic notions when they see photos or hear stories about my grandparents' interactions with movie stars. But with only very few exceptions, most of the actors, producers, or directors that contacted or visited them were potential clients, not actually friends. And it was very rare that they would have a single conversation past the transaction. The Frazettas were never part of the Hollywood social scene, even during the time they lived in California while Fire and Ice was in production. They didn't attend premieres or parties, and yet people continue to spin fantasies on social media about Frazetta and Eastwood and other stars hanging out and becoming good friends, especially when they see the Gauntlet poster or any of the photos that are included in this. And since Frazetta was a gun enthusiast and photos of him posing with his .44 Magnum appear online frequently, it's almost inevitable that someone will insist that Frank and Clint could be twins. Frazetta would laugh at this and joke that he was better looking. My grandma would get very annoyed and once said, "I hate it when fans say Frank looks like Clint Eastwood. I hate it. Are they blind? Look at him. They look nothing alike. It's ridiculous. If Frank looks like Clint Eastwood, then I look like Vanna White, and I don't." And believe me when I say that when my grandmother was annoyed, people didn't argue with her if they knew it was good for them. This concludes my episode for today. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with Frazetta Fridays with Frazetta Girls. And as always, thank you for watching.